This is a video of a talk from Crater Remote Conf given to a live audience in February 2016. This video was made possible by sponsors like Modulus.io, okgrow.com, and spacedojo.com. If you would like to find out more information about upcoming conferences, be sure to go to conf.crater.io and put your email in the form that pops up in the lower left corner. Enjoy the video. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Crater Conf, the second talk. So today, for the second talk, we're going to have Dominic with us from Meteor Development Group. Welcome, Dominic.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, so you're going to be talking about designing for reactive UI, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I don't know. For me, like I find it very interesting. Like there's definitely like some paradigm shift that has to happen in order to build a real-time UI. And so with a lot of people using Meteor and React and those kinds of things, I thought it would be really interesting to get a talk on the topic. So I will turn it over to you, and we'll take Q&A at the end. So have at it.
Awesome. Hey, just wanted to say thanks. Thank you, Josh, for putting this on and inviting me. And thanks, everyone, for being here. So let's get started. React, Angular, Blaze, Ember, Mithril, Riot, Vue. So you finally wrapped your head around reactive UIs. In testing, your apps are snappy and feel alive with activity. But now, your app is in production. There are thousands of folks using your product and data is flooding in. This is causing the UI to update so fast, users can't tell what's happening. Layouts are breaking. Trying to track down the cause of UI changes is your personal Everest. You thought you knew how to use reactive UIs, but you don't. Simply knowing the technology isn't enough. You need to design specifically for reactive UIs. In this talk, we're going to examine some common UI challenges and present a set of principles that serve as the basis of an approach to reactive UIs. My name is Dominic Nguyen. I'm a product designer at Meteor, focusing on developer experience. Before Meteor, I founded a software engineering company called Percolate Studio. We specialize in designing and engineering real-time user experiences. You might be familiar with my work if you've taken Galaxy, Atmosphere, or Meteor's example apps for a test drive. I know a little bit about real-time UIs. So why does designing for real-time matter? The reigning web paradigm since the genesis of the browser has been request response. Someone who views a web page sends a request to a content server, and the server receives the request and responds with the page. This constraint results in linear experiences punctuated by page refreshes. While it's perfect for the internet's original intent of viewing content, like static documents, we've actually come a long way since then. Our technology and capabilities have evolved. In 2016, we want the web to do more. For instance, we want it to tell us what to eat, to guide us to our next destination, even to adjust the temperature of our own homes. We expect apps to be connected and react to changes in the system. Prior to real-time, the provenance of actions was clear. They could be attributed to a single user and confirmed with a page refresh. Now add several users to the system who act on the same data and whose interface is updated reactively. Imagine the difficulty in communicating system logic to the end user. When interface changes in front of someone, despite them not doing anything, they're in action, there's an opportunity for distrust to take hold. In the real-time world, our challenges are not only to build delightful features, but to translate complexity and illuminate causation. Translation is to express the sense of words in another language. It is expressing the complexity within our apps in a way that is natural and easy to understand. In practice, it's just reassuring users that we've registered their actions and that something is happening. Causation is the relationship between cause and effect. Our goal is to eliminate relationships in data, which just means to show how two data points can lead to a new insight. You can harness the power of real-time and reactive UIs to deliver next-generation experiences. However, creating great apps doesn't just come from having the ability, but using that ability well. 3 principles guide how we approach real-time. Be state-aware, expect change, and preserve context. Let's talk about being state-aware. The user should know the state of the system at all times. Our world is chaotic. Frameworks like governments, machines, and apps provide structure to unpredictable systems. Our goal when creating real-time apps is to communicate that the world inside of our apps, our digital world, is in fact ordered. So let's see some concrete examples. Connection status. Connection dropouts occur frequently. You're on the subway, you're on a bus, you go under a bridge. Let's take a look at different ways to handle this. Most apps don't notify you when the connection is spotty. When a user submits actions without an active connection, it's liable to be lost. Even with technology like optimistic UI, there are countless edge cases where the data may not make it back to the server. Be state aware by communicating the factors outside of the app's control that could lead to unexpected results for the user. Loading. Users often wait on content due to low bandwidth or weighty assets. Be proactive by indicating that the system is processing their actions and loading new information. This is a real-life example from a product that I've been working on called Galaxy. We're watching a user scale a test app by adding a new container to their deployment. When the container count changes, a progress bar appears so that users have an idea that the system is acting on their behalf. Confirmation. Show that the app has empathy for user goals. Many apps suffer from undercommunication of state. For instance, when a user makes a change, say, deleting an item from a list, they'd like to know if it was successful. Show that your app is listening and cares about the user by responding to their actions. This example showcases a user flow that has both a loading indicator and a confirmation message. When the user submits the support form, they are notified that their request is in progress. Upon submission, a confirmation notification reassures the user that the request is in safe hands. The second principle. Expect change. The product should communicate what will happen when a user acts. Surprises are terrifying. Consider the mechanical precision of an automobile. Surprises in that system are flat tires and engine smoke. Like a car, an app translates immense machine effort in a user-friendly manner. Unlike the car, the digital medium, our apps, allow us to anticipate and inform users of change. Communicating results is one way to set expectations. When drastic state changes are possible, foreshadow the results of actions. A common mistake in the design of reactive UIs is to render interfaces without notifying the user. This leads to experiences that are unpredictable. Giving users opportunities to process what will happen prevents surprises. Skeleton templates. Skeleton templates make an app feel more responsive by foreshadowing layout. In many cases, real-time apps defer rendering layout till all relevant data has arrived. However, since the templates of isomorphic apps are already on the client, we can show a skeleton layout that foreshadows new screens and sets the expectation that data will fill empty spaces. So what do these skeleton templates look like in the wild? Here we have an activity feed. When data has not yet loaded, we show an intermediate skeleton layout. It's the gray. When data hydrates the component, we replace the placeholder content with real content. When applied at the page level instead of at the component level, layouts are able to be rendered instantly the final principle. Preserving context. The user should know where the content comes from and where it belongs. Since we can't possibly see or even consume what's happening at all times in real-time apps, it's important that we establish and reinforce a sense of space, where elements exist relative to each other. Doing so means that we create landmarks in our apps that users can rely on to get their bearings. Consistent placement. New content should appear in a predictable location. Let's take a look. Reactive apps can determine where items should be placed through diffing. However, this isn't always intuitive because new items may not appear in the same place. On the example on the left, you'll see that new items have entered the list at various locations. You can get users accustomed to navigating to key points in your app to find what they're looking for. New items in the example on the right only appear at the top. Maintain bearings. Sometimes things just don't appear in predictable locations, whether it's by sort order or any number of things. A classic example is adding items to a list sorted by item title reactively. You can preserve context by articulating state changes that do not appear in predictable locations. What that just means is in adding animation or adding a transition, you can help a user understand where an item is coming from and where it belongs. Animation in this case can be used to great effect to communicate where new content is loading, and slowing an interaction, so slowing the animation, can result in greater clarity. Save scroll position. When moving back and forth between distinct screens, We often forget to preserve context by saving a user's position. Ensuring that users return to the same scroll position preserves the continuity of the experience and saves time. Users should be accomplishing their goals, not trying to trace where they came from in your information architecture. Sometimes technology like reactive UIs can blind us to the fact that we're creating software for real people and not just making something cool. These principles serve as are foundational when crafting reactive UIs. So I encourage all creators and all app builders to discover what works for them. For a head start, try these three. Be state aware, expect change, and preserve context. So we'll have an extended Q&A session after this. Thank you so much for viewing, going through the reactive UI design principles with me. You can say hello on Twitter at Damian. Let's take some questions.
All right. Thanks, Dominic. That was a good talk. So I'm gonna interject my own question here. You talked a little bit about like saving, not saving your place, but like using animation to kind of handle like keeping like bringing in a new item, right? That's sorted and maybe in the middle of a list or something. Probably one of the biggest things that I dealt with. We built an app where you like everybody gets on the page and they do live voting, and we were sorting the list by how many votes it had, and so
Yeah.
once like everybody got in there and you're like, okay, go, and like all the voting would start happening and like everything was just like jumping all over the page. Like how would you manage something like that? Like it's not necessarily a new item coming into play, but that list is getting resorted all the time.
Absolutely. That's a really common one. And the problem with list items jumping around and say something like a leaderboard is that it's possible that you as a user will accidentally click something that you didn't mean to click because the UI is reactively changed so often. In that case, I would consider setting a timeout. So like a 10 millisecond delay before items were automatically resorted.
I see.
Or so that might be one possible solution. Another possible solution is actually slowing down that leaderboard sorting experience by having the user manually trigger like an update. So and this is one of those cases where request response is actually kind of useful because you can get a sense of position and have the opportunity to submit a vote.
I see. Yeah. So I think kind of what you're suggesting is more like the Twitter, like you have 5 new tweets and then they click that and then like it would update the voting essentially like, hey, the voting numbers have changed. Would you like us to resort?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Okay.
Because in a very large system, those list items will be changing sort order all the time, like many times a second.
Cool. All right. So let's take some of the other questions that actually had votes since I just interjected my own.
Okay.
Do you use any frameworks or libraries to help build out the reactive layouts like Galaxy or Atmosphere?
We pretty much have no. The short answer is no. we've had to build out a lot of this stuff for Galaxy and Atmosphere. However, the principles that we use can be applied to any reactive UI or any reactive view layer. So, for instance, I know in Meteor you can assign or you can identify when data has loaded and when it hasn't loaded. So you can start building your like skeleton templates, for instance, just on that if statement, on that conditional.
I see.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And in many cases, I would recommend integrating these recommendations, integrating these principles at the component level, to begin with, and then porting them to the page level. That will get you pretty far.
Okay. All right. All right. The next question, and so before we get into this question, I'll just
Sure.
say, like, what kinds of things are you working on at MDG right now? Like, what teams are you a part of? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's no secret. We haven't said anything about it. I work primarily on Galaxy.
Okay.
So Galaxy is the major focus for us. That's why I have so many examples of Galaxy in action. And what we're doing is the challenges there for reactive UIs are deal with like containers and notifying the user the state of containers of their like container deployment. And since that is subject to change, so containers can go down or any number of things can happen with containers. They can be manually scaled. We have to reflect that in the UI. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I brought that up not because I thought it was secret or anything, but I thought it might be relevant to answer some of these next questions because you're not necessarily like working with React or Blaze like on those teams, kind of pushing that forward. So, and again, I'm pretty sure like any answers here are like your own answers and not necessarily representative of MDG.
These are my answers, not MDG's answers. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the next question from Robert is React Native the next big thing combined with Meteor to create iOS and Android apps? I know that we heard from Martin talked about some of the Cordova updates, and then at the end, like he snuck in this little bit at the end of Meteor Night that he was going to be working on a React Native experiment. So maybe you could talk about some of that.
I am not super familiar with React Native, especially React Native in regards to using it with Meteor and to create iOS and Android apps. So short answer is not sure. However, I think that the idea behind React Native, which is to provide a reactive view layer for iOS, is really cool. It's something that iOS doesn't necessarily have, that as far as I know, and React will allow it to have that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of excited. Like I think it could be really, really interesting because like the way that React Native actually has a bridge that will output actual native code rather than like a web UI wrapped kind of Cordova application seems super interesting to me. Even with like the new WebView support coming out with 1.3, I still think React Native is going to be way better.
Absolutely. I think that there's a class of apps that it makes a lot of sense to use Meteor's like inbuilt Cordova integration. And those class of apps, they compete on coverage, meaning how many possible people have access to those apps. So for instance, an educational app that I worked on, they actually competed on the fact that they had an Android integration or an Android app, an iOS app. That was really useful for our clients to our past clients to get into schools and sell a solution that could cover a wide variety of students. And while that solution might not have been like the perfectly like smooth, it might not have embodied like perfectly smooth like animation and interactive interaction design. It was able to take them from 0 to 1. React Native is going to be really great for the developers who care about interaction design and who actually compete on interaction design. So think about a consumer app company, for instance.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna so real quick, there is one in here like, is React going to replace Blaze? I'm gonna kind of skip that one. I don't feel like it's super related to the talk. And I think that there's some good stuff that's coming out of Transmission as well, the podcast. So we'll kind of skip that one.
Sashka's doing a really great job with that
With
Transmission
Ben.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So do you think that certain interaction paradigms like paging are outdated with the rise of reactive apps?
I don't think so. I think reactive apps build atop the classic idea of paging. I don't necessarily think that's going to go away. I think there are certainly apps that rely more on reactivity places and those apps I would classify as apps that have like living interfaces, and things like Uber or Slack, for instance. Like most of your interaction with those apps actually occurs on like 1 or 2 screens. However, there's certainly like still a need for pages for like the about or the settings or what have you.
Well, I think Pete Corey here was referring to actually like pagination, like, listing out a bunch of, like there's 100 items in this list and we're going to do 10 per page, and you click here to show 20 through 30 or something.
Server-side paging. Oh, click here to show 20 or 30.
Yeah, like, when you're like browsing through Amazon and like you get to the bottom of the list and then you click to see the next screen type of thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that goes away? Like, do we move more towards infinite scroll, or is there something else?
I think that's like a question. It doesn't necessarily have a ton to do with like reactive apps. However, I'll give you an example. Well, it doesn't have a ton to do with reactive apps. I think it has more to do with just what type of experience we want, like designers and creators want to provide for their users. But I'll give you a real example of paging, like server-side paging in a reactive app. So in Galaxy, we show a list of 10 items. And those 10 items have a bunch of subscriptions to hydrate the component. These subscriptions yield a graph, like a real-time graph of like metrics. In this case, we actually need paging because without paging, the browser tab just blows up. So we use paging in this case to limit to mitigate slow and like non-performant like browser interactions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's only so much the human mind can consume in kind of one gulp off the page, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So, that you definitely have to think about that. And like, if I put 200 items on the screen, there's no way in the world anyone's going to be able to comprehend that quickly, And I think that's the goal of any app, is maybe to help that comprehension. So.
Yeah, I'm reading the comments here. I think Ebaldas has a really great one. I really hate when people have to see more and you actually want to see the last page items if it's history based. That's a fair point.
Yeah. All right. So, when are some good times to use animations and transitions?
Animations and transitions help articulate state. So the difference between two states. So I'd like to say try to include them all the time. They smooth out a user experience. So instead of so for instance, list items, instead of a bunch of list items like appearing on the screen and it causing an instant browser reflow, animations will articulate the zero, like the in and the out of that node much better and in a much more intuitive way than just instantly rendering the DOM. All the time. That's the answer. Or
All
try.
the time.
Uh,
Yeah.
There's a class of things that actually warrant it. So, for instance, the most where I find animations and transitions to be most useful is list items and lists in general. Where I find them to be a nice to have and an added benefit are things like when you open an overlay or when you add a new field in a form.
Okay. All right. Looks like we got animate all the things.
Animations are pretty animations are pretty easy though, so it's not like a huge overhead to get them in there, especially with things like there's a package in Atmosphere called Momentum. It's really easy. It's like a drag and it's like one, just install the package and then follow the API. And there's also plenty of packages for React that will do it too.
Funny comments.
Yeah, really fun.
All right, so yeah, I'm curious your take on this too. Like every designer is a little bit different. So Robert asks, when you have to create a new UI, what are your first steps from scratch to the final result? Are there some kind of techniques to success for you? And then I'll probably add in here a little bit. Like I know that the designer I work with, she usually starts in Sketch, yeah, and then she'll move, like once that's been approved, she'll move into just straight HTML. So what's that look like for you?
Oh, so this is like a design process question.
Yeah.
My design process starts on paper first, and then we move into Photoshop. I actually break out I know some people combine the actual design with the front end implementation, but I tend not to do that because I find that manipulating something on a canvas is much nicer and easier, and keeps my context only towards only on that canvas. And then once the final design is approved, we move into like application engineering. Regarding like building reactive UIs, I'd first start with building the smallest atomic unit, so the smallest component, and then continue building outwards from there to larger and larger components, and finally to entire views.
All right. Hey, this is an interesting one from Will. How long should you show your transitions to be sure your users see them? Like, do you set it to like 50 seconds?
So I actually wrote an article. I actually wrote an article on this on the Percolate blog, and the too long didn't read is 150 milliseconds to 350 milliseconds. The 150 milliseconds comes from how long, the minimum amount of time it takes our brains and our like visual organ, the eyes, to actually process movement. So to attend to and notice movement, or attend to and like understand movement. And 350 milliseconds comes from this idea that have you ever looked at, Josh, have you ever looked at someone, you're speaking to them and their eyes are shifting around as they were like scanning a landscape?
Yeah, yeah. As mine are scanning the page. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it's called a saccade. And what that is it's just how like humans like process like visual information, and we process it by like tracing the outline of an image with our eyes, and we actually shift the position of our eyes like 3 times a second, about. So 3 times a second divided by 1 second, that's about 350 milliseconds. So 150 to 350 milliseconds. That's how long you should show transitions to ensure that users see them.
Okay, good answer. Yeah, that's always interesting, right? Because like I talked to my wife about like design and stuff, and she talks about how she went to art school, and they always talk about like trying to get you to go in a circle and kind of stay on the page at different focal points. So it's interesting. I'm gonna have to read this article when we get done.
Yeah, 150 to 350.
Yeah. All right. Good question. All right. Are there any Meteor packages that help delay, I'm using air quotes here, updates from subscriptions, but tracking changes at the same time? What I'll say here is that I think there's a difference. You don't necessarily have to show the changes on the page. There's David Burrows had a great article, and I teach this in my Master of Meteor course, where you keep track of a timestamp, and then like as that timestamp, as new data comes in that's newer than the timestamp, you don't render that onto the page until they hit a link or something, and then you update that timestamp. So
Yeah.
it's kind of my thoughts on it.
I would probably defer to you on which Meteor packages to use.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any good package per se, but yeah, I think it's just something you'd handle on the client side when you care about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not super hard. I'll try to find that article and put it in the Slack chat room for you guys. All right. Okay. So Pete asks, lots of Meteor apps seem to have a lot of the same flaws, data appearing out of nowhere, poor user notifications, etc., that make them immediately stand out as Meteor apps. Do you think there's anything we, the community, or MDG can do to fight this, or is it all on the developer to care about and address these problems on their own?
I think we have all the tools that we need to provide these user experiences to our customers, and it's just a matter of, and they're actually fairly straightforward in terms of like implementation. So I would say like if you care about the user experience of your Meteor app, there's plenty of material out there for you to like improve it. I don't think anyone like it makes sense for folks to try to do it for you.
Okay.
That's speaking as me, Dominic, not MBG.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like maybe there's a guide article waiting to be written there, perhaps, but
yeah, absolutely. The guide, Elijah, like is completely right. It has well, I wonder if, yeah, the guide actually does have a UX section, and it was written by my partner, Tom Coleman, who used to work with me at Percolate Studio. And it is the most comprehensive source for patterns. In fact, it documents like almost all of these patterns pretty wonderfully.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. So I would say, like, Pete, I'll challenge you to take these ideas that you think are maybe problems and bring them up in an issue in the guide, and maybe there could be some discussion around that. And we'll see if maybe there's a missing guide section that could be added, which I think could
Yep.
be super interesting. All right. So Evaldus asked, how many people should balance reactive design versus non-reactive? I mean, does everything have to be reactive as it has an additional development cost? It's kind of an interesting question, because for me,
Yeah.
like I do find that there's times where I don't care if the data is reactive, and
Yeah.
Meteor doesn't really have a good idea for that. Like maybe a Meteor method or something, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that as well.
In addition to the comment of reactive having an additional development cost, I would say it has an additional like performance cost as well. You can't have like so many active subscriptions and expect your pages to be performant. That's just the limitations of not just Meteor, but just the technology, like browser technology in general. So the core of the question is, how do you balance reactive design versus not reactive? First, identify what type of user experience you want to offer to your users. If you're building a leaderboard app, it behooves you to create a reactive UI. If you're building a content site, you don't need reactive UI. That's just not something that really matters that much. However, if you're building the comment section of a content site, things change a little bit there.
Yeah.
It mostly reactive kind of comes out of the box in a lot of these, and Meteor at the very least.
Yeah. All right. So James Baxley. Oh my gosh, I've got this stupid script that closes Slack so I don't stay in there all day, but it keeps closing it on me.
Yeah. Okay.
So James Baxley asks, have you run into any performance issues with UI animations on Cordova apps? I know you guys did some work on Verso and that kind of thing. So maybe you can speak to that.
Prior to the WK WebView update, Cordova was running a version of WebKit that wasn't as performant as, say, Safari. So because of that, we were like, animations weren't that great. They were perfect. They were fine for what we needed them for, but we actually had to limit the scope of animations to provide a better user experience because the animations could be choppy in some cases. Now with WK WebView, I think that's coming out in 1.1.3. You're able to have the same browser, like browser in iOS as Safari, the native Safari app. So that kind of solves many of the performance, like the UI performance hiccups.
Yeah, I agree. Like we've got an app that's built in Cordova, one of the clients I work with, and they're like super excited for Meteor 1.3 and the new Cordova stuff, because there's definitely like it's just not quite as performant. But yeah, should be good. I'm excited.
It's leagues ahead of what it was. I'm very excited for it. Martin's doing some great work.
Yep. Oh, okay. Here we go. So Pete decided to pull the AMA and ask how has it been working for MDG? Give us some insight.
Give us some insight. I joined as the first designer here, and my fears when joining were, this is an R&D company. It's an eng specific, like eng heavy company, and when I got here, I realized, and the people here, they really support the design process, and that in supporting the design process, it allows for great work to happen. So working at MDG has been pretty good thus far.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, you previously worked at Yumly too, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Yumly, for those of you who don't know, is a recipe search engine. It's intended to index the world's recipes. They have a fantastic uh, mobile app on both iPhone and Android. So I'm just going to plug my old company now, and it's really well designed. And you can search for the rarest recipes and also filter by things like allergies or cuisine or whatever you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. I actually found it because they have an Apple TV app. So, maybe that's the next question is when's MDG going to have like Apple TV app, like platform support built in?
Yeah.
Probably never because they don't have a web UI view, right? Kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll take one more and then we'll do like a 10-minute break before the next talk so people can grab some whatever they need, bathroom breaks,
Cool.
soda, snacks. All right. Wow, we totally almost got through them. Well, okay. We'll take Ben's, but the other one was good too. What are some good UX design resources that you think would benefit standard dev types?
Uh,
So, like, what
all,
should I read since I suck at design?
yeah. I tend to get the most value from user experience companies like Nielsen. Nielsen does some really great research. I think it's nielsengroup.com, and they break down like kind of advanced user experience topics in ways that are very easy to understand. Their blog is fantastic, and it's research backed, so it's something that the nerd in all of us can get behind.
Yeah,
That and
because
following. Go ahead.
they do all the like TV stuff, right? Like tracking people on TV. Nielsen.
That
Is that
might
what
be
they
a
do?
different Nielsen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just search for Nielsen UX, Nielsen Group,
Okay.
and UX in Google, and you'll find what you need. That and following designers on Twitter is really helpful. So Luke Wroblewski, Luke W has a
Yes.
fantastic talk. He works at Google now. He came from other eBay.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. He's got a series of books too. I'm pretty sure. Was it the
Yeah.
like Don't Make Me Think books? Maybe.
Oh, that's a fantastic book too. You should. That's a great one. Not Luke W. Luke W. did web forms, so he has
Oh,
like
okay.
the seminal book on web forms and mobile first. Yeah, Sai, thank you.
Nice. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you. Oh, there you go. Ben put a link in the chat. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming on, Dom. Really appreciate you giving the talk and answering
yeah,
all these
absolutely.
crazy questions.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Yeah. It's my pleasure. So, if you are tuning in for the next talk, I will put a link in here in just a second in the chat. I'll also put it in Slack. I believe Pete Corey is up next, and we're going to be talking about NoSQL injection and modern web applications. All right. Thanks, guys. See you in a few minutes.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
This video has been a Space Dojo production. You can click the Learn More button to find out more about us at spacedojo.com. Or you can click the subscribe button to get notified about new videos we put out each week. Thanks for watching.